Well, first of all, welcome everyone and everyone online. I'm Tom Calvines and I manage the field station here for Oregon State University, and I lead the Oregon Kelp Alliance, which grew out of this place. For those who have not heard about it, am I doing this right?
Click out of that.
Okay. No. Okay, so what is the Oregon Kelp Alliance, you might ask, if you haven't heard about it? We're really a community group, an alliance of folks coming to the question of kelp forest health in Oregon from multiple perspectives. We're as inclusive as we can be. Everyone is welcome, regardless of where you're coming at this from, whether you're an urchin diver, conservationist, a scientist, a student. We try to make room for everyone because we believe that everyone has something to offer the group, and we try to be as inclusive as we possibly can. As you can see, there's a bunch of logos from a lot of different groups that are part of the Alliance, and it continues to grow. Every year, it just keeps growing. I'm trying to manage multiple technologies here, so pardon me. I'm just going to say a few things about some of the work we're up to right now, and then we're going to get into the topic of tonight's meeting. So right now, we're executing a program under a grant from the NOAA National Centers for Coastal and Ocean Sciences. And this is in support of essentially a sort of a snapshot of what's going on in Oregon's kelp forests right now, which we're referring to as a status report, and the development of a stewardship plan, because we want to know, like, how should we proceed to address some of the changes that we've observed over the last couple of years. Meanwhile, we've also, myself and Dr. Ford Evans, received a Sea Grant research grant to study the opportunity to co-culture an edible seaweed called dulse and purple sea urchins that come out of these urchin barrens that you're going to hear about. We're halfway through that project. It's pretty promising. We don't have time to go into all the details of that project, but it's a really cool project we're doing right now. Myself and 60 co-authors around the world just published the Global Kelp Forest Challenge Roadmap. And the Kelp Forest Challenge is a global effort to address changes that are happening in kelp forests around the world, not just here. And the challenge is to protect and or restore 4 million hectares of kelp forests around the world by 2040. Super ambitious goal, but it's an ambitious bunch of people around the world working together on this. And we are not going to get into the details of that, but it kind of tracks a lot of the stuff we're going to be talking about. And you can find out more about that by going to the Kelp Forest Alliance, the Global Alliance, and go to the roadmap page. You can download the roadmap. It's a really nice piece of work that we did together. And finally, we received some philanthropic funding to launch a pilot Oregon restorative kelp mariculture project that is launching right now here in Port Orford, in collaboration with the commercial fishing fleet. So that's sort of what we're up to right now. The project that we're going to talk about tonight is as I mentioned, this kelp forest status report and stewardship plan. And we're very happy to have brought aboard Elise Coachman that you just heard about a minute ago. And Elise is really focusing her work on the stewardship plan. And that's what we're going to really talk about tonight. You're going to hear a little bit about things we've already learned in our status report. We spent a lot of last year doing a lot of surveys and dive surveys and aerial drones. You saw some of those pictures of the aerials from the kelp forest. So we're analyzing those data right now. And now we're developing this stewardship plan about what we do in the next few years going forward. Both of these will be published in June of this year. And what we're super interested in right now, and I'm very interested in, is hearing from you all. What do you think about our kelp forests here in Oregon and how we should go forward to be good stewards of our kelp forests? So I'm going to stop here with my intros. I'm going to turn it over to Elise, but I'm going to stick around. I guess I'll be the front row student. And I'll stick around if there's questions or things you're confused about or you just want to know more about. I'm happy to answer questions. But as Elise mentioned, we've got some refreshments coming. We're going to present you with a lot of information, and then there's going to be time to really sort of discuss it, digest it, and got some activities planned for you. So I'm really excited. I'm glad you're all here. I'm glad you're all here in the virtual space and look forward to hearing more from you. So thanks a lot for coming. Thanks, Elise.
Thanks, Tom. Great, so thank you, Tom, for that introduction. I just want to reiterate as well that I'm here, Tom's here to answer questions, and we also have Dr. Sarah Hamilton, who's virtual, she's online. So if you have any questions that are related to some of this first level of info I'm going to give you, which is a lot of our background information and what's going on with Oregon right now, that'll be mostly in our status report, and Sarah can help answer some of those questions if you have a more technical question. And just to also emphasize, this really is kind of like a workshop, discussion-based meeting. So I know we have a lot to present to you, but we also really want to hear from you guys, get feedback from whoever has shown up here today, as well as people online. We'll have some room for feedback afterwards as well. If you don't have all your thoughts collected today, that's okay. And so a lot of this is we want to really make sure we're incorporating community feedback in what we're doing moving forward.
Elise, I'm going to interrupt for 1 second and
Yes.
introduce Caroline
Yes.
Rice. You probably noticed her sitting there and not being introduced. Sorry about that, Caroline. Caroline's going to help out, take some notes. And do we have a way to monitor the chat as well?
I think Carol
Are
is
you
doing
doing that?
yeah.
Okay, great.
Yeah, so if you guys are putting questions in the chat, I see that someone said it was hard to hear, so I hope you can hear me now, but if not, let me know and we can try and move things around. Okay, good, cool. So with that, we're going to start with a little bit of Kelp Forest background. If you've been to these meetings in the past, you may have heard some of this, so it might be repetitive, but there are also, I know, new faces as well who have shown up today, and so I want to make sure everyone has background on really what's going on with this issue, why ORKA is doing the work we're doing, and there's some new information now about our status in Oregon that we're pulling in from our status report moving forward, so there might be some interesting new stats for you guys to learn tonight. Cool, so what is kelp? Kelp is a large brown marine seaweed. They photosynthesize like plants and they're worldwide pretty much. So we have kelps line a quarter of the world's coastline. They're a really, really, really important marine species. And there are a bunch of different species of kelp. They have a global distribution. These are great graphics that I can share with you later on. I'm going to kind of skip over this for now just so that we can keep getting to more info, but these are great graphics that really just show the global distribution of kelp. And there are also many benefits to kelp. So why are they important? Why do we care? There are just some of them up here. So farm for food, coastal protection, and they're a habitat for biodiversity. So they provide a lot of habitat for young juvenile fish. They support a lot of recreation, fisheries, tourism work as well. And so this is the first opportunity that I kind of want to turn to you guys and just ask, what do kelps mean to you? Is there something that kelps have provided you guys that have been really, really important? And people online as well, when you think of kelp forest, what is that benefit that you're getting out? And it could just be purely, I go to this spot along the coast and I see a beautiful kelp forest and I love looking at it. Are there any benefits that immediately come to mind for you guys? Yeah.
We harvest it, use it in our garden, put it in the compost pile.
Composting, that's awesome. Great.
Yeah, what, put it in soup.
And soup, is this just you're collecting from the beach and then you just bring it home? Yeah.
But I also think that I kind of associate it with seeing whales.
Seeing whales,
I feel
that's a
like
great one.
That's why we're not seeing them.
Because so it also, there's a connection between kelp and whales in that they provide habitat for a lot of the species that the whales, gray whales in particular, feed on around here. So that's a great point. Is there any online? No, okay. Well, that was great. Thank you guys for sharing. I think it's fascinating to know that you make soup out of it and you compost, and I'd love to hear more about that soup later on. With that, we do know that kelps are facing emerging threats right now and in the past decade or so. And so there's a brief list of them up here, including ocean warming, pollution, invasive species, and ocean overgrazing. There's a lot more than just this, but we've had kelps impacted globally. So you can see the yellow dots all around that map, as well as what Tom had referenced earlier with the Global Kelp Alliance. It's trying to address this sort of global crash that we're seeing in a lot of these species. And in particular, we had warming events with an El Nino in 2014 to 2016 that caused high ocean temperatures, as well as we've had sea star wasting disease, which I'll talk about later on, that knocked out a lot of predators in the system, as well as urchin overgrazing, which has been a result of a combination of events that have led to overgrazing of kelps and kelp decline. And we'll get a little more into all of that. Okay. So purple sea urchins. Has everyone heard of purple sea urchins? Great. So purple sea urchins, I just want to point out they're native to Oregon. So they're not invasive, even though they seem invasive right now. We're now starting to call them a pest species because they are native here, but they are kind of a nuisance. And so they do graze on kelp, so we'll call them a grazer for now. And they've lost a lot of their predators. And so their populations have boomed. They've gone unchecked in recent years, which has allowed them to overgraze on our kelp forests and has led to the decline that we've seen now. And so the two takeaways that you should just keep in mind when thinking of purple sea urchins is we've had a decline in kelp forest cover and an increase in these things called urchin barrens. What is an urchin barren? Well, the picture on the right here is a photo that Tom actually took out at Humbug.
Just south.
Just south of Humbug. So this is what the ocean looks like in some areas just off our coast right here. And I don't know about you, but that does not look like a healthy kelp forest to me. And so
Used to be.
Thriving, yeah. And so something to note is that urchins can live, there was a study done that showed that urchins can live without food for up to 16 months. It may be longer than that, but that was a study that was done. So over a year without having any food input, and they're still alive. And so that says to us that even when we start to reintroduce kelps, these hungry urchins can reactivate and they'll gobble up anything and prevent this sort of the kelp from being able to reestablish in areas where we still have these massive urchin numbers. They're just being dormant for right now and waiting for that new kelp. And so this is a huge problem. Oh, and another, just to give you an idea, a lot of people ask, hey, why don't you just go harvest all of them, ranch all of them, and then sell them? It's great economic value. They have uni inside of them. This is the uni that they have on the right-hand side. And so when you think of a more healthy urchin who has uni that you want to eat, you can think of the left side. So you see like the yellow or orange, really voluptuous uni that would actually taste good. On the right side, that's what the uni looks like. You can't even really tell where it is in that organism because it's consumed its gonads trying to maintain itself. Does that make sense to everyone? Yeah, it's kind of Jurassic when you see it. And so for reference, those two urchins were taken on the right side, were taken from Nellie's Cove just this past year. And the one on the far right side where you can kind of see little gonads, that was the healthiest one from the ones that we pulled out. So this is what we're looking at just off our coast right here.
Are they still alive?
They're still alive. Yeah, well, once I crack them open, they're not. But but when these were living out on the reef, yeah. And yeah, they have, I mean, they'll feed on things and they can kind of reestablish, but they're just waiting for kelp to show back up so that they can eat it. So what's going on here in Oregon? And I know we talked a little bit about sort of, we've seen these trends here, but what does it actually look like? And so this is getting into our status report and the work that Dr. Sarah Hamilton and a lot of our partners have done this past year and the years before, collecting data and summarizing it so that we can understand the state of Oregon's kelp forests. And I'm just going to share a couple brief snippets today just so we can get an idea of like evidence for what's actually happening in our backyard. So to start us off, I just want to let you guys know that through scuba data, so underwater surveys done, we found a decline of 40 to 100% compared to a decade ago in our kelp forest cover. And so it varies by space where we are on the coast, which gives us that difference in that 40 to 100%, but pretty much across the board, there is a decline in our kelp forests. And then just to give you an idea of this kind of regional variance, I have two maps up here and I'm not going to go too in depth. I don't want to get too much in the weeds on this one, but just to show you, we have Cape Arago on the left and Port Orford on the right. And the yellow color means that there's kelp. The purple color means that there is little to no kelp seen during underwater scuba surveys. And so if you're looking at Arago, you can tell that there's kind of spatterings across where there are some areas that have higher densities of kelp, but then also areas where there's really, really low densities of kelp. And then you look over on the right side, the top we have sort of Nellie's Cove area. And then I'm just gonna, sorry for people online, but this is kind of Humbug area, Island Rock, and Redfish. And so you can see that we don't really have much kelp left here in Port Orford. And I'm sure a lot of you guys remember a time where we had a lot of kelp here. And so this is quite discouraging to see, but it also shows that there are regions across the coast where we don't have as much of a decline as we have in other spaces. And that doesn't mean that those places are necessarily healthy, but it means that we need to take a different approach in how we're going to protect and restore these areas. And so something else to note is that a lot of our kelp forests, the majority of them are along the south coast of Oregon. And this is also primarily where we've seen a majority of our loss. I believe Tom told me today that 90% of our kelp forests are in the southern coast, and we've lost about 17% of them. So that's a really high number. Is that correct?
That's about right.
Yeah, something around there. So it's not good. It's not looking good. So this is preliminary data, and so this is an estimate, but I just want to let you guys know that along with that scuba data in Oregon, we've seen a 75-fold increase in the amount of purple sea urchin, the density today compared to a decade ago. And it's hard to really understand what that means, but it's pretty significant. For a grazer species to increase even 5 to 10 times, that's going to have a huge impact on the species that it's grazing on. And so for purple sea urchins, for every spot where we had 1, we now have 75. And so I like to compare this to cows, because cows are grazers, right? And so if you put cows in a paddock, if you have 1 grazing in a field, you might not see much of a difference if it's able to meander around. But when you put 75 in that same paddock, you can imagine that your stocks that the grass they're feeding on is going to be depleted really, really quickly. And so it's not the best to have a 75-fold increase. And so we're really worried about the kelp and its ability to recover. And we have places that used to look like this, so Redfish Rocks and Humbug, that now look more like this. And like this, and we have some transition kelp areas as well where they're kind of feeding on the boundaries of these kelp forests. And so this doesn't look like what we want to have out there right now. And then the last piece of this puzzle, I'm going to kind of do this one a little bit quickly, but I'm happy to answer more questions if people have more questions, is talk about Pycnopodia. Has everyone heard of a Pycnopodia or a sunflower sea star at this point? If you've come to ORKA meetings before, you probably have. And so they're a beautiful sunflower sea star, and they're also a known sea urchin predator. And so they had kept sea urchin populations in check for years and years and years. And around the same time that we had our El Nino impacts and a lot of the changes that we've seen, we also experienced sea star wasting disease starting from 2013. And so this impacted sunflower sea stars super poorly. So they went from across the entire Oregon coast to we lost about 98% of them in Oregon and about 90% across their whole range, which goes from, I believe, the Aleutian Islands in Alaska down to Baja, Mexico, and maybe a bit further. And so 90% of them across their whole range were lost, but specifically in Oregon, we lost 98%. And that's a huge decline. So all of these factors working together has led to the state of our kelp forests that we have now today. And the reaction that I got from you guys is pretty drastic, but you can see a healthy sunflower sea star and a wasting one. And so this isn't good. You can tell that it's not good. And specifically in Oregon, you can see around that 2013, 2014 mark, we really just had a drop off of our populations here in Oregon. And so this map here shows density of sunflower sea stars in Oregon over time. And we have kind of flatlined from 2016 through to 2022, but I do want to point out 2023, where we've had an uptick in sightings. And so we finally have a slight bit of hope that we might be getting some more recruits back. We're nowhere near where we were at all. And a lot of these are juveniles that have been found in estuary areas, but it is a glimmer of hope that this species might be able to recover. And that bodes well for a lot of the work that we want to do moving forward as well. So the takeaways from this and the things that I want you guys to remember as we go through the rest of this information today is there is an active and ongoing threat here. The status is not uniform across the coast, so we have regions that look different, sites that look different, and that urchins play a critical role in all of this. So we've had a decline in kelps, an increase in urchins, and a decline in Pycnopodia. Does that all make sense so far?
What's the possibility that you get so many urchins, like some populations, like rabbits, and then a disease starts to spread that starts to cause a decline in urchin?
Yeah, it's a real possibility. I mean, when you think of something like COVID, you think you have more people in one area, there's a greater chance of transmitting something, but it's also one of those where we can't rely on a disease outbreak to kind of knock the population back down. And I think with this particular species, with urchins, that's different than a lot of like boom bust cycles with prey and predators, is that these urchins are living in that zombie-like state for 16 plus months. They're hibernating. So even when their prey is decreasing or depleted, they still are waiting around for their next opportunity rather than dying off. So zombies, yeah.
And then they're not very valuable for even a sea star to eat, right? Is that the new state?
It's an interesting question. There still needs to be more research on it. It's been found that Pycnopodia will still eat them in that diminished state, and they don't actually prefer one over the other if it's healthy or not. They'll still crack it open and eat it. So yeah, I mean, there's still more research to be done in that area, but even if they're in a barren state and you put a Pycnopodia down, they'll eat them. I mean, they might prefer to have higher value ones, but they don't have a mind the same way that like you and I would think about that. Yeah.
Yeah, just on the disease question, there are diseases that do affect urchins. There's the black spot disease, a couple others, and we do look at that. We're not seeing a high incidence even in barrens. We do when we do surveys, we do look for that. So it appears, but it doesn't appear to be taken out. Which doesn't mean it won't someday, right? But I think it might not happen first.
So we had a question from someone online who said they were wondering whether it's possible to raise Pycnopodia via aquaculture, and that's something that we will address later on when we get into some of our strategies for the stewardship plan. So that was a great question. So I guess now we know what the problem is, what can we do about it? And that's what we're going to be talking about today. So the Oregon Kelp Forest Stewardship Plan. I don't know, I know Tom already said this, but I'm Elise Coachman. I'm the program coordinator for ORKA, and I was specifically hired to work on the Oregon Kelp Forest Stewardship Plan that we're putting out in June of 2024 this year. And so a few things to note is this is an interim plan to protect and restore Oregon's kelp forest. So this is our starting point. We need to start somewhere. We need to start this process on what we can actively do to fix the problems we have. But it's something that's going to be a living document that we can update later on down the line as we're learning more about these systems and we have better techniques and we have more information coming from we're learning from the work that we're doing. So that's where we're starting with. So the Oregon Kelp Forest Stewardship Plan, like Tom said, we're funded through a grant from NOAA's National Centers for Coastal Ocean Sciences. National Center for Coastal and Ocean Sciences, it's always a tongue twister. It's the partner document to the status report, so they're coming out at around the same time. And if you have more questions about the status report, you can feel free to ask them. I'll either direct you to Sarah or we can follow up with it afterwards as well. And then the primary goal for our stewardship plan is developing this framework. So we want to make sure that we're putting together our best options for protecting and restoring Oregon's kelp forest over the next few years. And then lastly, we're also incorporating diverse perspectives and expertise. So you guys are one piece of that puzzle, is looking at our community members as one really big piece of that puzzle. We're also consulting with our Science and Technical Advisory Committee, policymakers, conservation groups, and a load of other different groups to get input and expertise from a bunch of different areas and making sure that we're putting forward informed opinions and best practices for this. So what do we mean by stewardship? So I put together just a brief definition for what I sort of view stewardship as, and I put together the thoughtful and careful application of a broad suite of natural resource management tools for the purposes of long-term ecosystem health. So for the purposes of what we're doing, that's kind of a definition that makes a lot of sense with what we want to be putting forward and working specifically to protect what we still have and restore what we've lost here in Oregon. And so I want to take a pause really quick and ask both you guys here and everyone online if you sort of, what does stewardship mean to you? What does the word stewardship, how does that resonate? Do you see it along these lines, or do you view it differently? Has it had a place in your personal lives, in the work you've done, where it's meant something different when it's not applied to kelp forest or resource management? And is there any initial reaction to that word that you have? Yeah, go for it.
So I just retired from Wild Rivers Land Trust.
Okay.
And stewardship there is very similar to this. It also includes annual monitoring, so collecting data and knowing exactly the direction to go from that information that's gathered.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, go for it.
I also think more of maintenance, it's like you need a restoration action followed up by regular in-check fire.
Yeah, great.
I think of respect, respecting the natural beauty that you care.
Yeah, I like that. And I think the words like thoughtful and careful try to pull in that sort of the relationship you have with those resources that you're working with. So respect is a great one. Someone online said stewardship entails responsibility, I think, for us to take care for the land, and that got a lot of reaction. So I think that's great. The taking care of the responsibility, this sort of respect and mutual interaction that we have. And also what you guys were saying about sort of the maintaining and the monitoring, that's one of those, we believe, tools in this like broad suite of natural resource management tools that is a big part of all of this. So thank you. Cool. So speaking of those tools, what are they? And I want to draw your attention to the monitoring there at the bottom. So I'm glad you guys brought that one up. This is just a few of them. This is not all encompassing. I also am going to take a step back and just let you guys know that we're not telling you everything today. There's a lot of information to cover, and I don't want to completely bore you. So we're giving kind of a holistic, high-up overview of a lot of this. And so those stewardship tools include our core strategies, which we'll be going more in depth with today. But then they also include things like workforce development and scientific communications and policy. And so all of these pieces working together really allow us to be able to do this work more effectively and more efficiently. And our core strategies is what our active restoration and protection work is, and then the rest of these kind of uplift those strategies. And so I also put up some pictures here. I think most of them will come up, or we'll talk a little bit more about some of those later, but that's all ORKA and ORKA partner related work that has gone on in recent years, other than the bottom right corner, which is policy. So our core strategies for kelp forest protection and restoration, these are ones that you may have heard of before, and this is where we're going to be outlining them very specifically in the plan of what that looks like and what we hope to be doing over the next few years to actually make a difference in protecting and restoring Oregon's kelp forest. So we have grazer control, kelp enhancement, and predator recovery. And if you remember from what we spoke about earlier, is we've seen an increase in urchins, a decrease in kelp, and a decrease in pycnopodia. And with our core strategies, we're hoping to kind of flip that script. make them go the other way so that we can actually we can start to see results and start to see changes in the environment back towards the way that it used to be 10+ years ago. So just to give you a very brief overview of these, because they can get really complicated if we go too far in depth, but our first strategy is grazer control. So looking at urchins, understanding that we need to restore the balance of these urchins who have gone sort of unchecked these last few years. We need to allow for the recovery of kelp and be able to make sure that we can promote kelp growth in areas by clearing out these urchin barrens, by getting rid of these really dense pockets of urchins, because if you try and regrow a kelp forest in any of these regions, you're not going to have a great time in them being able to reestablish if there are still urchins and urchin barrens that are overpopulating those areas. And so we have 3 methods to do that, which I'll tell you about briefly. We have urchin pulling, urchin removals, and urchin trapping. And those are 3 primary grazer control methods. And so urchin pulling is our volunteer urchin divers. And so going out and actually using a hammer and smashing urchin in water. This is an established practice that has seen success in other regions as well, specifically in California. And so this is something that has shown to be effective in other areas for actually decreasing density of purple sea urchins in the environment. The other option, which has been used a lot in California as well, is urchin removal. So using commercial urchin divers to actually harvest those urchins, and then they can be put to things like compost actually and other areas, so that they go to a use rather than just being discarded. And that removes a large quantity in a short period of time, but it's also kind of costly comparative to volunteer divers. And then urchin trapping, which is really similar actually to kind of like crab trapping, but you use a flat disc and you drop it down baited with kelp and then pull it back up and you'll have urchins swarmed on it because it's like food. Yeah, let me go there. And so you can pull it up. It's a little bit less efficient because you have to drop each trap and pull it back up, but you can also put a lot of them out, and it's it's less active work. So you can drop it, leave it, and then come back.
So do the zombie urchins,
They'll come on it, yeah.
they wake up,
They
they smell
sense
it
it.
somehow?
There's some sort of, whether it's the others moving around them, or there's a smell, or I'm not quite sure what triggers them, but yeah.
And then what do you do with them when you pull them up?
When you pull them up, so there's actually a composter up in Coos Bay area yes, Seacoast, and so they'll take it and they make, they'll take like any sort of shellfish and other donations for making their compost. So yeah, they have, I mean, their shells are really good for enriching soil, similar to probably
Acid.
Yeah. Well, they have actually, I wish I had a photo of it. I can find a photo or a video, but they have like the little
They have 2 feet.
that come out,
Like
it's like
sea
hundreds
stars.
of them, and kind of walk along. Yeah, it's kind of, yeah, they like, I'll find a video for you later and we can show you. Yeah. Yes.
On the urchin culling, was it an efficient method with a rather smash like you clear a lot on an area fast?
There's pros and cons to each of the methods. So I think you can clear a certain area pretty quickly, but it also is, it has a lot of organizing to get a lot of people around it, and it depends on weather conditions and how many people you have and how much.
The outlay for money after that, would you use less money for that than you would for the other 2 processes? But you said there's no waste in the other 2, but yet there's no waste in the ocean. You out there slam that thing with a hammer. It's going back.
Right, exactly.
There's no waste.
Exactly.
So
But if you
if that's efficient and less cost expensive, that would be ideal.
You'd think. I think the reason I said no waste from the other 2 is because you're removing it from the ocean system, and with some of the permitting policies, you have to make sure that there's no waste if you're pulling.
There would be some waste that live actually in the ocean, just leave it.
Yeah.
I think you explained about it.
Yeah, all of these techniques are, there's pluses and minuses to each one.
Right.
There's cost, there's efficiency, there's permitting, there's execution.
Right.
So we're really looking at this as all the above, not like this is the best one.
Right.
They each have their, like, it's pluses and minuses.
Which way as far as talking about the people?
I think it'd be kind of tricky, 'cause, I mean, you have to have enough people to, be able to scuba dive and,
Right.
Yeah.
and the conditions to get out there.
You gotta have enough people.
And then, yeah.
So I'm sorry.
All right.
No, yeah, just to summarize that for people online, because I don't know if they can hear, but we were just talking about cost effectiveness versus effort and all of that. And so Tom said there are a lot of different factors going into these methods, and that it's something that we're actively looking at is comparing these three methods, and also to note that there are different circumstances in which you want to apply each of these, depending on what your ultimate goal is, what resources you have available to you and stuff. So where one might work really well, another might not work as well. So it's great to have this whole arsenal of different tools to use when we have a specific need for them. So I hope that summarizes for the people online so that they can hear that. And there's also a link online for an urchin walking. So I'll get that to you. Yeah,
Just wondered if permits are required?
yes,
Yes.
And then reporting?
yes.
Okay.
That's a great question. So all of these activities, all of the work we're doing is permitted with the appropriate agency. We work really closely with a lot of the agencies to make sure that what we're doing is correct and that we're allowed to be doing it. So you can't go out there just with your hammer and willy-nilly start smashing urchins.
Scuba gear.
Yeah, and there are a lot of rules and regulations around what needs to happen. And so it's also one of the barriers we have, but just so everyone is clear that it is permitted, the work we're doing, we work with the state agencies on that. So, yeah.
With that permitting in mind too, isn't there a small contingency of commercial fishermen who are also trying to remove the urchins to grow them in their own farming habitat?
Yes, so that's a great question. There are a few who are ramping up efforts for that. It's something where there's a lot of like efficiency questions still on the page. How can we do it where we are actually putting in enough that we can make profit on it? And so there are a lot of still questions. It's kind of like in the pilot phase, but there are people in Oregon who are working on that. And I can tell you more details about that later if you're interested in hearing more. I think someone associated with that is actually on online as well. So, yeah.
I also just want to point out that one of our urchin culling divers is sitting right here, Nicholas. So if you have questions about what that was like and how it was done, and stop him during a break at some point, or if you want to share anything right now.
Urchin snack. That's okay. On the spot.
It's fun.
No, I would think it would be nice.
Like these zombies, I'd be afraid to come back, even if we smash them.
Cool. So I'm gonna keep us moving forward to the next topic for now. So the second part of our core strategies is this kelp enhancement piece. And so this is not work that we're actively really doing yet, but it's something that we need to be doing and moving towards in the future in order to actually reestablish these kelp forests. And so once we've actually effectively cleared an area of urchins, we can move towards this method. A lot of these are still, at least for us here in Oregon, more research phase for now, but in order to assist in kelp forest reestablishment, we want to be outplanting kelps where we can. And so in order to do that, we have a couple different methods. We have green gravel, spore bags, seeded lines, and potential genetic enhancement, which is work that people have done elsewhere. And so these methods are kind of in a novel new phase here, and we can talk more about each of them, but you'll also probably hear a lot of information about those in the future as we're sort of ramping up this work. And it partially goes into some of the work that Tom had mentioned earlier with the mariculture project that you're starting to ramp up here, and how we can sort of bridge that mariculture work with restoration work and kind of cross those lines. So yeah, and then also once we have kelp forests reestablished, they're then less vulnerable to overgrazing, and we can also increase their resilience to these changing conditions and things like climate change as well. So assisted recovery is really important. Cool. And then the last prong of our core strategies or column of our core strategies is predator recovery. And specifically here, I'm going to talk about Pycnopodia. They're not the only one, but they're the central piece of our recovery strategy for predators. And in order to really help get those urchin populations under control and maintain that long term, like we've said, is how do we ensure this as continuing? Like, we can't go out every year and keep smashing and smashing and continuing that fight. We need something to naturally maintain that within the system. And so that's where our predator recovery comes in, is having these sunflower sea stars back in the populations that they used to be in order to keep purple sea urchins under control and keep that grazer down. And so we have a three-pronged approach to that. The first being tracking and monitoring our wild Pycnopodia population. So getting a better idea of what's actually out there right now and understanding where those movements are, what their potential for natural recovery is. Are they naturally recovering, or are they going to need a lot more intervention, and just what the status is in Oregon, because there's a lot unknown about this species right now. Second is expanding research on Pycnopodia urchin dynamics. One of our scientific advisors does a lot of work up in Alaska on Pycnopodias and urchins up there, but applying it to the urchin species we have here, specifically with purples, understanding how those dynamics work here to give a better understanding of actually what's going to happen if we're able to outplant some and create, establish a captive breeding program to later outplant them. So that brings us to the third one, is assisting our natural recovery. So doing what we can to actually uplift the natural population, and then potentially establishing a captive breeding program in partnership with aquariums and other groups that are doing this in other states as well. And so being able to breed these, which has successfully been done in captivity up in Friday Harbor Labs, and being able to then outplant them with the necessary permits and quarantining processes and all of that, to then target specific areas for getting these natural populations back up. But that part is a little bit down the line, because there's still a lot of work to be done there. And then also just pointing you to the roadmap to recovery for the sunflower sea star. That is a great document that came out a couple years ago from TNC and a couple other partners down in California, that basically outlines a really in-depth process of what this looks like for Pycnopodia. And so we're definitely going to be pulling on that and leaning on that for our stewardship plan priorities when it comes to predator recovery. I saw, yeah, a question back there.
So on number one, track
Yes.
and monitor, does it have to be done underwater? So can you use like LiDAR or something?
Well, so I prematurely shook my head on that one. So primarily it's when we have scuba surveys, we tell people to look out for if you see one. There are a bunch of different methods for finding them right now, because they're few and far between. So there aren't really specific Pycnopodia surveys that are going out, because you don't even know where to begin to look for them at this point. But it's while people like our reef check volunteer divers who do a lot of our data collection, if they're out, they're also keeping an eye out for them and noting when they see them. And then we're working on kind of finding other underwater scuba survey groups that are doing different population assessments and surveys to then keep an eye out and let us know if they see one while they're out there doing surveys for other species. You can also find them in the intertidal. So if you're tide pooling, we're going to talk about that next, but if you're tide pooling, you can potentially find them that way. But in terms of like a sky view down, no, because there's no way to really see the seafloor in like the detail to be able to identify, hey, that's a Pycnopodia. You kind of need eyes on the ground for it. Yeah.
I might have missed it, but what killed off the sea stars exactly to begin with? And is that still hampering the recovery?
So sea star wasting disease, and it broke out in around 2013, 2014, and it is an ongoing threat. So that's one of the key pieces of this puzzle. Is there's a lot of research that still needs to be done to identify what exactly that vector of transmission is, what really is going on there, whether or not there is like a quote unquote cure or some sort of way to increase resistance to it. But right now there's a lot of questions around what's actually going on there still, and how to safely and effectively reintroduce where we can make sure that we're not actually spreading the disease more. And so those are all questions that are currently under research. There's a lot of Pycnopodia scientists who are looking at those questions and have made a lot of progress in recent years, but there's still a lot more work to be done. It's a great question.
And I just want to add to that, that the sea star wasting disease did affect many sea star species along the coast. You might have noticed the almost complete disappearance of even our common stars along the coast. But in recent years, those populations have really rebounded and recovered really well. For some reason, this one has not. But as Elise said earlier, we are starting to see, I think, Caroline, you saw one not that long ago, right?
I get so excited. I saw a baby in the intertidal today. It was like this big.
Oh.
So they're out there. Just gonna look really hard.
Saw one a couple of years ago, right?
None of the other sea stars eat urchins.
There's some evidence that maybe a couple of other large many armed stars similar to this one, but we don't know a lot about it. We know because we've been doing the research that this, they call this one the lion of the intertidal or something. It's like super voracious, and like if you look at some of the time-lapse film that they've done as part of some of these research projects, it's amazing to watch them in action. As soon as they show up on the scene,
They're pretty fast.
all the urchins and abalones and everything else that's could be consumed by them just takes off.
Urchins is what they call it. They're pretty big.
They can get very low.
Yeah, and they live for a long time as well.
Does anything eat them?
That's a great question.
No.
Probably.
I don't know, maybe they eat each other. Things like that tend to like eat the specifics.
So the urchins can sense that they're there?
Yes.
Somehow, yes, they do.
And it might be a domino effect. It might be something, because like you can see, I wish I put a video of this in, but they call it an urchin stampede, where they put a picno down in a specific area and watch all the urchins kind of run away. And so where you may have seen with picnos in higher numbers before would scare them away from certain areas or make them hide under rocks and crevices, rather than just being out in the open everywhere, where they are right now.
Wonder if that's a chemical thing or?
It seems
They're
like
looking
it
into it,
may
yeah.
be. There's some of the research that a couple of our members of our alliance have done in Alaska are demonstrating the effect of the presence of a pycnopodia extending a pretty large area, an area like about the size of this room.
Yeah.
And have it persist over the course of a couple of days.
Right, that would be.
So that's pretty significant, and we're definitely looking closely at that
Yeah.
part of the strategy.
So yeah, that's number 2 on our list, is there are some really important research questions that we want to address, and specifically here in Oregon, and what that looks like for us in our ocean. Yeah.
Sea stars run them down.
Yes.
They can.
Yeah.
I wish I put that video. I'll find it after when we're kind of just chatting and show you. Yeah. There are a couple of online questions as well. Someone had asked about research on sea star wasting disease. I hope we addressed that one well enough. And then someone asked about sea otter reintroduction as a predator recovery strategy, and there seems to be an ongoing conversation about that. So one of the people that we've worked with a lot is ORKA, and they have kind of a strategy for that species specifically moving forward. For us, we focus primarily on sunflower sea stars because it's a more short-term solution to this problem. Otters we see as more of a long-term solution to this. It's something where we need some more kelp forests established before we can consider their reintroduction, and that's kind of a far in the future. So this is an interim plan for right now, but down the line, we're hoping that that'll be a more pertinent strategy for us. So cool. And then, yeah, so this is Have You Seen Me? So one of the things that you guys can actually do, so it's not from the sky, but if you like to walk down the beach, if you like to go tide pooling, you like to look for shells, you can find sunflower sea stars potentially in the intertidal. Carol actually found one in the intertidal, just a little juvenile at the beginning of the summer. And so they are out there. And so it's really important that we're gathering this data and understanding where these populations are starting to recover And so if you do happen to see one, or you think you've seen one, take a picture of it. Do not touch it, don't disturb it, but take a picture of it, note the time and the location, and you can go to our website, has a whole Pycnopodia page with this information if you can't remember, OregonKelp.com. But we also, you can submit observations. We have a couple different places you can do that. I don't think you guys can see it, but it's seastarwasting.org. You can submit your observation. We will be able to see that, or you can just reach out to one of us, or Sarah Gravum, who is our scientific advisor for specifically on Pycnopodia work. And so there are a bunch of different methods to actually contribute that data. If you do see one, it's really important. That's our website on the left-hand side that has all that information to help you also identify it. There's a really good graphic and the information to submit an observation. On the right-hand side is actually a Pycnopodia that was pulled up offshore of Port Orford by fisherman and captain Aaron Ashdown. Sorry, I'm a little bit frazzled. Aaron Ashdown on FB Misty. So he had pulled that up. It was just on one of his lines, and he was like, this is a Pycnopodia, took a picture and let us know about it. So we know where these are starting to pop up. And years and years ago, Tom told me lore that fishermen used to pull these up all the time, and they were called like a moth nuisance species.
Right.
They were just everywhere. And so to see one was a really big deal, but it's one of those where you can tell friends if they see them, take a picture, submit an observation. It'll make a really big difference to the being able to monitor these species as they're recovering. Cool. Okay. Next is, before I kind of wrap us up on all of this, I just want to let you know. Oh, someone asked, do we happen to know why sea star wasting disease is on the decline? I don't know if we can actually say for sure that sea star wasting disease is on the decline, but that we have seen certain small scale recovery from certain sea star species, but I don't know if there's enough known yet to make that claim or to understand why that might be happening. I can also direct that question to someone else later on if they have more information on that.
Yeah, I would say, like what I made earlier, I would say you could point to the return of our common stars and many other species and say, well, that represents somewhat of a decline from the epidemic proportions we were seeing back in the day. But then you have to consider this species where we're still early, it's very early days to say that they're recovered.
Yeah.
But there's some early signs. So like, like any disease epidemic, it's typical to see, here's a population that's recovered, here's one that isn't. Is it still out there? Yes. Is it better overall? Probably yes, but it's not over yet. The good news is there's a really robust group working up and down the coast on all things sea star wasting, and in fact also looking at other other disease organisms in the ocean that could affect them. So we're really spinning up a very much more robust monitoring network for marine diseases, which is a good thing.
Yeah, so I think with that question, it's a great question. It's just a little bit too early to tell just yet. And so I'm just gonna briefly tell you guys that not only are we working on these strategies, this suite of tools, but also acknowledging that there are different conditions, challenges, and enabling conditions that will either get in our way, prevent us from doing this work effectively, or actually allow us to do this work very efficiently and effectively. And so I've listed some of them. If you're interested, I can go into detail on them, or we can chat after about some of them as well. But just understanding that time is a huge variable here. Like, this is happening right now. It's an active threat. The longer we wait, the harder it will be to actually recover, and the worse the situation will be. Permitting, funding, resources. Funding and resources is always one of those challenges. Data sharing and availability, and then climate change and unforeseen ecological events such as sea star wasting diseases. We don't know when these are going to pop up. We don't know if there's going to be a second wave, things like that can be unpredictable. And then in terms of enabling conditions, there are things that really help uplift this work and allow us to really do this work effectively. Specifically collaboration and partnership. So we have a lot of local collaborations and work that we do with other groups as well as regional and global. So regionally, looking at what work has been done in other states. A lot of people have done pilot projects similar to what we're working on here. And so learning from what they've already done and doing a lot of knowledge sharing there, as well as looking globally to groups such as the Kelp Forest Alliance globally and the work that's been done and partnering with those groups to allow this work to move forward. Long-term funding and resources, the opposite end of the barrier, but actually an enabling condition as well. And then blue economy, which looks at some of the work that Tom was talking about with Dr. Ford Evans with this sort of ranching effort and urchin dulse co-culturing work that's been done up in Bandon. So growing out these purple sea urchins for sale from actually pulling them from restoration sites and things like that to then be part of this restoration economy or blue economy. And then public education and engagement and policy as well. So what does this mean for Port Orford and what does it mean for other coastal communities and where do you guys specifically fit in? And I know each one of you is going to have kind of a different role in this, and I know we have volunteer divers, we have people who want to be involved in collecting PICNO data and observations if they can, and people who just kind of like to learn. So we're going to go back to our stewardship suite of tools that we started with at the beginning of this conversation, and I'm just going to draw your attention to a few of them. So for scientific communications, that upper right-hand corner is our Oregon Kelp Alliance Instagram. So following along with the work that we're doing, looking at the things we've shared, that magazine that's sitting right in front of you, 1859, we recently had a section in that Carrie Newberry put together for us that highlights a lot of our photographers and a lot of information about what the Oregon Kelp Alliance is doing. It's great. Feel free to look at it. We also just shared it on our Instagram as well. So things like that is sharing what we're putting out there, educating the people around you and making sure that you yourself know what's going on. And so by being here, you've already taken that first step. Community engagement, that first step as well. So we have obviously the Picnopodia poster, so being engaged in that community work, community-led efforts. We also have on the far right in the middle was an evening with urchins, was an event we put on up in Bandon earlier in the fall of last year. And the middle one is a mural that actually went up at in Bandon on the farmers market building. And so it's right outside. We're also working on putting together some infographics and panels for them that are going to be up hopefully this summer to go along with that. And so it's a great educational tool, community engagement. And so continuing to attend events like this is a great way to keep updated and being involved as a community, as well as we're going to be doing some discussion questions and activities later on once we wrap this up. That'll be a good way for you guys to stay engaged right now. And then core strategies. So we have people like Nicholas who do our volunteer urchin pulling work. And so if you're interested in something like that, we're hoping to get that program ramped back up soon. And so if you are a diver, you know someone who's a diver who would be interested in participating in that, and then hopefully down the line, some of the kelp enhancement work as well. That's one way to be involved. And so I'm gonna, I guess, ask if anyone has any questions on some of the content we went through, if you have any outstanding questions for right now, and then we're gonna get into a couple just like brief little engagement activities so that we can actually learn a little bit about what you guys think of all of this work and what you see moving forward for the stewardship plan, as well as how you really connect to the kelp forest. So I guess if anyone has any questions first, and then we can move into the first brief activity. Yeah.
Is there any plan in the area for these stars? I mean, you know, for like
Cultivating.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we're right now we're at the early stages. We need one thing is we sort of there's so much to unpack. It's hard to cram it into a short presentation. So thanks, Elise, for getting us through a lot of material.
It's a lot of information, so thank you for
so the sort of bullet point answer is that right now we're in discussions with the agency, with OEFW, to enable permits for incidental encounters. So we want to be able to encounter these things. They are currently being reviewed by National Fisheries Service for a listing as either threatened or endangered species. We believe they're going to be listed as threatened, which will not stop us from doing some of this early work, which is good. So being able to be permitted for encounters, and then we want to get another permit to allow us to hold on to some of them. And then that will lead to hopefully a captive breeding program, but it's a step at a time. There's a lot of sensitivity around it, the delicate situation, there aren't many out there, but we want to do what we can to, advance the cause, so to speak. But right now it's going to start with these early discussions, and we even encounter these things.
Yeah, and there are people in, obviously, I mentioned before, Washington, who actually have captive breeding programs up and running, as well as people in California working on it. And so part of this is working with those partners and figuring out how we can bring it here, partnering with Oregon Coast Aquarium and kind of bringing it up to speed. So it's gonna be a little while, but there is, that's the plan down the line. Yeah, there's just a lot of moving parts for it.
Like I mentioned earlier, there's a big, there's a whole other group of just like the Pycnopodia group.
Right.
We just had a great, a really good workshop just recently. We were down in Monterey for another meeting, and we all spun up just a Pycno nerd meeting, just nerded out with a bunch of people to come up with all these strategies. So yeah, it's really exciting work.
I was curious, one of your strategies on kelp enhancement, was genetic enhancement of kelp. Can you explain a little bit more?
Yeah, it's not work that we're actively doing right now. It's something that down the line could be really important. I can talk to you more one-on-one, but there are people that, are hoping to maybe make them more climate resilient or resilient to certain factors that may impact them. And so it's not something that we're actively doing, but it's something that we want to leave the door open for down the line as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I would just add that maybe enhancement might be
Like predator resistant?
It might
Yeah.
be, I would say rather than consider it to be genetic enhancement, so to speak, but more like selecting for heat tolerant strains of kelp. So we know like any situation like this where there's an environmental pressure that affects a population, there are always members in that population that persisted, right? So there is work being done. There's some gene banking going on right now. Folks we're really paying a lot of attention to conserving that biodiversity, so that if we're doing some enhancement work, we're not taking spores from Washington and bringing them here. We want to work with our own sort of a genetic stock, so to speak, and the biodiversity of that stock is really important. So all these things are being considered.
Yeah, and that's also, like Tom said, it's something where it's like the heat tolerant. So if we are working on outplanting, is we can take the ones that we're actually outplanting and looking at the specific genetic makeup of each of those and picking the ones that are actually the most resilient for outplanting, but maintaining that biodiversity. And so that's something that there's still a lot of work to be done before we're at a point where we're actually doing that work, but to make sure that we have that as part of our arsenal of tools moving forward. That's great.
You're not actually genetically modified.
Yeah, I'll note that down and maybe potentially reword that in how we're talking about that, because that's a great point. But yeah, that's just the way it looks. Yeah, not to freak anyone out, but that one, it's not GMO. Yeah.
Permitting was listed with the purple urchins, I guess, is one of the problem. Is it because there's so few permits that are allowed right now, or what's the deal with that?
So it's an interesting one. It's just a complicated process, and it's a delicate process of making sure that we are working with the agencies so they understand the work that we need to be doing and allowing for it to happen. A lot of the setup right now is for kind of recreational or commercial take, and so what we're doing is a little bit different than what's normally permitted. So working within the framework we kind of have to work directly with the agencies to make a pathway that works with the work we're doing. Yeah, does that make sense?
Yeah, thanks.
There's a handwritten online that was about the heat tolerance.
Oh yeah. I don't know if you are able to unmute, but if you're able to unmute, go for it.
Sure. Hey, do you hear me?
Yes.
Howdy. I'm Nate. I'm up here at UBC in Vancouver. Loved your talk. Super rad. I'm really interested in the kelp enhancement that you're doing. And I'm particularly interested in how you define a heat tolerant strain. So it sounds like you're doing some breeding and strain selection. And I'm wondering, what are the specific traits that you look for to, or that you're going to be looking for to determine whether you have that, and that's what you're going to proliferate when you're reestablishing in a certain ecosystem?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think we're not quite that far down the process just yet. So I think those are all really important questions that we need to be considering down the line. But for right now, what we're doing is focusing on the stewardship plan and building out sort of what pathways we need to be moving forward. And that's one of the methods we want to be using, but we're not actively doing that work right now. And so it's something down the line where, yes, we need to consider all of that. And I'd love to talk to you more about, it sounds like, your background in that work for this. But for right now, we're not actively having that work right now. So we don't have answers to all of those questions, but
maybe you can help us.
yeah, maybe you can help us figure those out, because it sounds like you know. So yeah, it's definitely putting it down on paper that these are the things that we want to be considering and want to be doing, but not necessarily what we're doing right at this moment. So I'd love to talk to you more if you drop your email or follow up and email me afterwards.
I'll call you, Nate. I owe you a phone call.
Cool. Thank you for that, Nate. That was really helpful. Yeah, okay, cool. Are there any others in the chat, Carol?
Which kelp species are the focus of?
So I guess I'll take that question as more of a general one. A lot of the work that we're doing right now, it's interesting on how we're talking about kelp forest, kelp species, or just full kelp. And so we've kind of thrown them all together. I do want to mention that we have understory kelp. So it's not all full kelp. It's not all the big, beautiful, tall ones that you can see from when you're walking down the beach, or the ones that you see washed up. And so the status report will take a look at both our bull kelp, our canopy kelp, as well as our understory kelp. In terms of work moving forward, our priority for our kelp enhancement work thus far has focused on bull kelp, but that's not to say that the other ones are not just as important in building out this ecosystem. But it is also important to note that bull kelp specifically, only it reproduces every year. So we lose it and then we get a whole new crop every year, basically. And so it's different and has a different life history than a lot of the other understory kelps as well. And so that's our primary focus for kelp enhancement for right now. But hopefully down the line, we can also look at some of the other ones for that work. And we don't look at, I think someone said someone said giant kelp. We are not looking at macrocystis or giant kelp here. That's more of a species that is found in California, but not so much here in Oregon.
A little bit.
Yeah, there's like one little patch reef, but not as often or as frequent. So bull kelp is our primary focus.
Well, do these urchins take down a mature bull kelp?
Urchins taking down a mature bull kelp. Yeah, so I don't know. I can see if I can pull it back up here, but there were some of these photos where you can see them climbing up, and they actually will, or they'll fight through and it falls. Yeah, let me see if I can just pop that one. Yeah, this one right here.
Yeah, I can.
Oh, I didn't know it.
Oh, yeah.
If I can, sorry, this computer in the way. There we go. So load. Yeah, so you can kind of see this would be urchins have climbed up here and actually cut that down, as well as here. You can see that these are kind of just stubby leftovers of what was once a whole really beautiful bull kelp.
The other thing they can do is, because when there's wave energy, the kelp can actually get sort of pushed down, and the fronds can be sort of entangled in the urchin spine, so they can grab onto it. And they can sort of gain up, consume it that way.
Cool. Any other questions for right now, or is everyone ready for just like a quick activity to get? Yeah, go for it.
What are urchins, what is their place in the ecology besides eating kelp? That they, now you're kind of made out to be the bad guy here, but don't they have a place also
Yeah,
what is it?
absolutely. I mean, they're not the bad guy. And that's one of the things, I mean, in this case and in this scenario, when you see these photos, it's really easy to kind of vilify these guys. And they seem terrible, but in a happy, healthy, balanced ecosystem, they play a critical role. And so that's why I made a point to emphasize that they're not invasive. You need them in a healthy ecosystem, in a healthy kelp forest around here. They're one component of many, but what is not healthy is when we have monocrop of them or a monoculture of them. That's not healthy. And so it's a great question of what role do they really play. And I think part of it is they're a food source for other species. You can crack the shells open, and even if you're out there with the I mean, I don't know if you have an experience with this, but when you crack those open underwater, like sometimes you'll see fish come in and feed on the uni right away, if there is uni in those urchins. And so they provide food for other species. There's probably a number of other reasons. I'm sure when their populations are a bit lower and in balance with the ecosystem, them actually grazing might help with some of the kelp, allowing for like the stronger ones to survive and things like that. So I'm sure there's a number of roles that they really play in a healthy ecosystem, but we need to get back to that point. Does that make sense?
It does, and can we, with the changing climate, get back to that place?
That's a great question. Can we, with changing climate, get back to that place? Well, that's one of the challenges is doing all this work in a time where we also have climate change to contend with. And so a lot of the factors that we talked about are looking specifically at urchins, at kelp, and at Pycnopodia, so at these species, but not necessarily looking at these environmental conditions. And so that's something that Sarah is going to be looking a little bit more at in the status report, but it's also a key piece of our monitoring and ongoing research moving forward is we need a better understanding of those other environmental factors here and how they're changing. And so part of the work moving forward is making sure that we are creating kelp forests that are robust and resilient and strong enough that they can withstand those changes. Because where they're at right now, if you're sick, your immune system's down and you're hit with something else, you're not going to recover. But if you're strong and you're healthy and you're hit with something else, your chances of recovering from that are a lot higher. And so that's what we want to do for our kelp forests, is get them to the point where even if we have climate change and we have all these other unexpected ecological changes, they might be able to actually naturally recover on their own if they're healthy enough. And so we need to get them to that point of being healthy enough. Does that make sense?
Sure.
Have the zombie urchins always been around, or are they something that mutated because of
So
numbers?
they're a normal urchin. It's an urchin that exists in a place where there's no kelp left, and they just sit in sort of this like stagnant, dormant state. It's a normal purple sea urchin, so they'll kind of reemerge and be a healthy sea urchin if there was a robust kelp forest and feed for them. But when there is none of that around, they just kind of they sit and do nothing as a zombie. Yeah, does that make sense? They're the same thing. They're not a genetically different species.
More.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
Kelp, it's more of an annual, it's not a, really, it's only limited for 1 year, it goes up,
Yep.
it goes up again, that's it. Okay, so these kind of like, maybe they're like the cultivators, that kind of kept the dead down and kind of get the whole thing going.
Mhm.
Is that right? Is that how it goes?
Yeah, so kelp is, or bull kelp specifically, is an annual species. And so you probably, if you have been around here for years and years and years, have probably seen these fluctuations of, oh, there's kelp here right now, but then it's not here right now. And you might not be as sensitive to those drastic changes, but now we don't really see any coming up. And so it would come and go and come and go. And that's why you would see kelp washed up on the beaches often. It has its life cycle, and it's at the end of its life cycle when it's being washed up, it's reproducing for the next crop.
Yeah, you used to go down Battle Rock Beach when I first got here 10 years ago.
Yeah.
2 foot, 3 foot max of kelp,
Yeah.
all down the beach. Now you hardly see it.
Right. So that's a great point, and I want you to hold on to that thought, because I'm going to be asking about kelp forests and the changes that
But
you
also,
guys.
you talk about the changes in the type of kelp.
Yeah.
It's like a lot of the forests we have now, they're changing. The trees that were indigenous to the forest before are not susceptible to the heat that's changing and stuff like, are susceptible to heat.
Right.
So the waters that come up, probably gonna bring up kelp, we're gonna ride it up, but water comes up there.
Yeah, it's a great question. So something I didn't touch on specifically in this, but is really important for our story is that Oregon's really unique compared to places like California and even Washington, is we have a lot of coastal upwelling, so it keeps our like nearshore waters here kind of cold, like a lot on the colder side compared to other areas. So we may actually have a slight bit of shelter from those high heat changes that California has been hit with. And so that actually gives us a unique opportunity here where we actually can restore some of these, and we might be a little bit sheltered from these changing temperatures compared to what some of our friends further south are experiencing. But to be determined on some of that. But Oregon is a really unique system, so there is hope. Questions online? Yeah. Can you give a quick description to green gravel and other seeding practices? Is there an idea that is leading the way? Carol, do you want to talk about that? Spore bags and green gravel? Carol's been doing a bit of our preliminary work on that and starting to get us set up on what that would look like. So I'll let her kind of explain what green gravel and maybe spore bags and seed design.
A little closer to the microphone. But so green gravel is a technique that's been used a lot in California. And so what they do is they're cultivating these baby kelps in a lab setting, and then eventually these kelps need to attach to something, so a rock, some sort of hard substrate. So in this lab setting, they throw in little pieces of gravel in that tank, so the baby kelps latch on to that tiny little rock. And then what they can do is just kind of dump that out in an area where you're trying to replant that kelp, and eventually their holdfast, similar to like a root system, but obviously it doesn't penetrate the rock, just grows on top of it. Those holdfasts will eventually grow onto the rock of the existing reef that they're trying to regrow. So it's a really cool technique where very innovative, but the problem potentially with doing it in Oregon is they're tiny pieces of gravel, and we have a really dynamic, wavy, powerful, full of energy ocean here and a not so protected coastline. So of course we can still trial this method and see if it works. Maybe some sites it'll work, some sites it won't. And another method is something called spore bags. So I don't know how much you went into kelp reproduction, but kelps actually grow kind of like seed pouches on their blades. If you ever dig through the kelp that washes up on the beach, on the blades you actually find dark patches that contain like reproductive material, similar to seeds, but they're called spores. And so these patches are something that we can just take from like kelp that's been washed up on the beach and just throw them out back into the ocean on these rocky reefs. And hopefully it releases those little spores and they can grow into a baby kelp next year. So that seems like one kind of low effort way to get through it, and something that might be like a community involved project if people are interested in like sorting through the kelp that's been washed up on the beach. It's a little nasty, but I think it's fun.
You get it when it's fresh or something.
Yeah, and so that's timing's also kind of hard. We do start seeing kelp washing up like early fall, maybe late summer, and that's also kind of when they start becoming reproductive. But then again, all the really like large amount of materials coming up in the winter, so that's when you wouldn't really want to go out in the ocean and dump them out. But yeah, it'd be a cool project.
What's the lifespan?
Just 1 year. Some do last 2 years if they're just hardy enough and they make it through that rough winter. But yeah, it's just our winter storms just hit them really hard and just pull them up from the roots.
How far out would you have to take it to, you said if you collected it, then you'd have to go far out, or can you just throw it off the rock?
Yeah, well, ideally we want to collect local kelp and then put them into local populations. So we wouldn't ever be going super far. And here in Port Orford, we have many different places that we could target. But one of our active sites is Nellie's Cove. So just around the corner from the dock, there's potential for like further out places like Orford Reef, but those of course are harder to access. But Nellie's would be great for like kayakers too.
Yeah, if you ever go out with South Coast tours, that's the spot that they take you to, and potentially down the line, it might be something that they
Oh,
work
they
with
would
us
offer,
on,
yeah.
on some restoration work. So like Carol mentioned, and like we talked about with some of the urchin grazer control methods, is there are pros and cons to a lot of the different health enhancement methods. And so it kind of depends on what you want to get out of it, what your different factors are for whether or not it's going to be super stormy. Is it a protected area? What life history stage do you want to be outplanting them at? There's also seeded lines as well, which is part of going to be part of this mariculture project, where you have lines seeded in lab and you plant them out on a more permanent structure that then grows out, and then you can bring those back or leave them out there and replant them in different areas. And so there are a lot of different methods. They each have their own pros and cons and different areas where we would want to apply them. And so part of our work moving forward is figuring out what's most effective in which areas and for what purpose. That was a great question, whoever had asked that online. I think it was Austin, so thank you. And yeah, is there an idea that's kind of leading on that strategy? I think right now, our primary focus has been more like the spore bag seeded line rather than the green gravel, given what Carol was saying about if those rocks are tumbling out there, they're not going to survive. Those little babies that are on the baby kelp on the rocks getting thrown around. So. And then someone asked about upcoming involvement opportunities. So you can, I guess online, my email is in there. So you can just reach out to me. I can sign you up for our listserv. We also have an Instagram, a Facebook, and you can follow us on our social media. And if you reach out to me, I can also follow up with you with those opportunities, because I don't have them to type out right now. So I'm gonna I think move us along and get us to our first just activity. This is something where I know you guys have been super involved so far. So this is kind of a fun one for everyone online as well. I'm going to pop us over to, is this the right one? Yes, this guy. So we're gonna do a word map, and what this is going to do for us is you can go to menti.com, or I will put up a QR code as well, and you can type in that code up there. That's 4523681. And what I want you guys to do, yeah, if you don't have your phone with you, that's okay. Yeah, if you have your phone on you, if you don't have your phone on you, that's also okay. We can just talk about them. But I want you just to put in, it gives you an option to submit words. And you can put 1 or 2 words and then submit multiple responses just on what's on the top of your mind after this discussion. What are you thinking about? What's like your primary focus? Are you thinking of kelp? Are you thinking of urchins? Are you thinking of sunflower sea stars? Are you thinking of ways to get involved, or do you have any other questions that you want to continue talking about? And so just a word or 2 that kind of represents how you're feeling right now, and then we can talk about that. Also give you a second to relax and maybe grab some food or go to the bathroom while people respond to this one. And then I think I can put a QR code up too, if that helps people. Yeah. Great. So yeah, just try and submit a couple words up there, and then I'll pick out a few that we can talk about. I'll give you like 2 minutes to do that, 2 or 3 minutes to do that. And then, yeah, if you don't have a phone or a way to submit anything, that's okay. I might ask you to just call them out in a second or 2 if you have time to think about it, and I can submit for you from here. I saw that someone put abalone online, so I'll put that one in for them as well. Are there any words that you guys want to submit without your phone? there anything you're thinking
How
about?
do you spell that star pickup? I like the
Oh,
one.
it's right there.
I love saying.
He,
No,
also if you don't spell it correctly, that's great. You can also put sunflower seed star.
I went right. No. I like that.
Is there anything that you guys want to say?
Oh, that can be in few words, but I like that I got out of it. Oh, yeah.
Persian stamp.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what you want. You was just thinking, you put like, what, 3 of those in Ellie's coat.
Chase them over a cliff.
Then he just gives the kind of.
Yeah, I'll also see if I can find a video. If you're interested, I can take your email and I can try and send you a video of the urchin stampede later on. It's a really cool video.
Really cool.
You also might be able to just Google and find it.
It's a good time for people to get.
Yeah, also please get pizza before it gets too cold, so get pizza.
Yeah. I like
So yeah, guys, feel free to get food, move around. I'm gonna just start talking about some of the words that are up here as they're coming in, but it sounds like abalone is a big one because I saw it mentioned and I threw it in there as well that we hadn't really talked about. And just so that you guys are aware, abalone is a really important species for us. It's one of the reasons why kelp forests are really important. Most recently, our red abalone fishery was closed in Oregon indefinitely until a couple parameters are met. And so in order to recover those populations, it is really vital that we restore our kelp forests. And one of the things that we need to be taking into consideration is just what predators are going to be preying on the few abalone that we have left. So protecting what we have and then providing them with the best opportunity to recover in terms of also building up our kelp forest so that they have this important habitat to do so.
On your list of words, that's your list of words that people are submitting.
That's what people are submitting, yeah.
And the larger the font, the more responses. you
Yes,
get word.
yeah, I didn't clarify that, sorry. So when you submit a word, it pops up here, and if 2 people submit the same word, it'll make it bigger. And so the more people who submit that word, the bigger it'll get. And so that means that more people are thinking about it. Yeah, I think a lot of these are really important. A lot of them are things that have come up. Is there anything in particular that someone submitted that we haven't addressed that people would like to talk about? Can you, yeah, I was gonna say, I don't know if you can see it. It's getting kind of small. That was not the right one. That one, sorry. Yeah, I don't think I can make it any bigger. I'll just read some of these out too, so you can see them. But we have research, which is an ongoing area that we need to be working on, is making sure that we have a better understanding of these species and the different interactions. Sea otters, action plans, ocean fisheries planning, engagement, out-of-box ideas, which I really like, and I think Tom would too, because a lot of this work is something where it's not a quick fix. It's something where we have to really try a bunch of different approaches and really see what's most effective in order to make this work happen. Adaptation, restore resilience, workforce development. These are all great. Green gravel, persistence, urchin stampede. Yeah, awesome. So I guess now that we have a good list going, is there anyone that wants to talk about any of these words or kind of move on to a question that I have for you all? Yeah, go for it.
Workforce development is particularly interesting, I think, for the South Coast. And is there any effort to like train more people how to dive around the Morford? And what is that?
Yeah, so for people online, if you didn't hear that, the question is the workforce development and what that sort of looks like, and if there's efforts to train more people. And so workforce development is a really big one, like you mentioned, especially for the South Coast, is we have really small, tight-knit communities, but that doesn't necessarily mean we have a lot of opportunities for some of this work. And so Tom's made it a really big priority within ORKA to really create these opportunities and build up sort of our next generation of kelp forest defenders and scientists. And so a couple of the different things that we're working on, one of them is working with Reef Check, and so increasing accessibility for Reef Check dive training and allowing more people who want to be dive training certified and want to be a volunteer diver to have those opportunities. They have, I think, some small scholarships to allow for that work, but then Tom has worked really closely with Reef Check on building out a way to get more people to be working, specifically young tribal members and college students who want to be able to do that work but don't currently have access to it.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
pivoting off of that, a couple of, I guess, examples. So, as Elise mentioned, ReCheck has piloted a program called Dive into Science, which is targeting historically underrepresented populations in the dive community, which you can probably imagine there are.
Yeah.
It's expensive.
Very.
So we are, as Elise mentioned, so right now we have two students from OSU who are tribal members, and we've supported them with some dive gear and supporting some of their training. So they can advance in their training, do more of this type of work, and try to build a cohort to pilot that Dive into Science program here at work. They're doing it successfully in California right now, and we'd like to do it in Oregon. And then I guess I'll just, not to put anybody on the spot, but I'll just point out, like, there are students that are coming here and we're supporting them advancing their careers. I don't know, Caroline, if you want to share some of the career advancement you just did, just like this weekend. That you
Yeah.
just told me about.
Yeah, so I started working with ORKA as an intern over the summer and then graduated in December, and I really loved Port Orford, so I just stayed here and was like, Tom, what can I do to help out? So pretty great to have that option. But yeah, I this past weekend I went up to Newport and did a dive training for the Marine Reserves program. So they recruit volunteers to monitor the Marine Reserves. They don't hit every reserve each year, but this year they'll be monitoring up north. So, but yeah, that was a really cool opportunity to have, and definitely was made possible by being down here and getting in the water a ton to do some of this like urchin removal work. Yeah.
Yeah, so those are some examples of, at that scale, at the sort of individual scale, what we're doing to develop opportunities for people to advance their skill set. And then on the larger scale, really leaning into the idea that what we're really trying to build here is a kelp forest stewardship program that extends along into coastal communities like this one, up and down the coast. And then honestly, to do job creation, this is work. We shouldn't be shy about saying that. There's a lot of work involved in this. We're in the planning stage right now, but along the way, we're learning a lot by doing things like working with volunteers, like working with professionals, developing training, developing more opportunity. And what we know going is that it's a long game, it's a lot of work, and it's a lot of skilled work. And so we need to develop that workforce. You go to places like California, there's like, thousands and thousands and thousands of divers. Not so much here in Oregon. There are divers here, but it's adventure diving, I like to say. Anyone who's done any diving here can tell you that. So what that means is we really need to develop that workforce. So we're doing things along the way to move in that direction, but the end game is to really develop a workforce of people who are actually get paid to do this work, because these are actual jobs, and we're in discussions with funders, decision makers. When we talk about the blue economy, and that's something that happens in the future, our message is, that's happening right now. These are those jobs, and we need your support to help us develop that workforce, because those are paying jobs that we need in our community and other communities up and down the coast. I'll get off that little soapbox, but Elise was right to say that and focus a lot on that right now.
Important so far.
Yeah, thank you for asking that one specifically, because we didn't really get into it, but it's also a lot of work that Tom has done to really secure grants for this specific work. Like, I wouldn't be here without him or without the people who've come before me to actually, like, I mean, but it is true, and like, I'm not originally from Fort Orford, so this is me moving here and becoming a part of this community and being welcomed by all of you guys to be able to actually help address the problem that's here in a meaningful way. And so a lot of the work that's right now happening and will happen in the future will hopefully support part-time and full-time paying jobs that then have money that goes back into this community. So that's a really big piece of it. And I think it's one of those where, as an environmentalist, I try and steer away from talking about like economy, or at least what capitalism type benefits we can have from this. But if we're playing into certain parts of that, you have to, and it can actually help boost the work that we're doing and help support that work. And so that's a big part of that blue economy piece, is playing within the system that we have in order to maximize what our results could be. That was a great question. Yeah.
So has there been discussion about facility enlargement, anything like that, to get this program underway and you know, build capacity?
Yeah.
I mean, like physical capacity?
Yeah.
So a couple of things. I'll say one. So you heard about the restorative kelp mariculture project that we're just getting started. So right now we're actually looking for property where we can do that work. We've got a lot of gear we need to purchase, and we need a place in the shop to do some of that work. So that's a little bit of capacity building there. And then we're, of course, talking with the Port Orford, and they are building, they're developing a new facility, a seafood hub, that's going to have aquaculture facilities within it. And so we're actively looking at that as another opportunity to expand capacity. And I should speak with my OSU hat on for a second about the field station. For those of you who may not have heard this, this field station is in a transition process to come under the Hatfield Marine Science Center. So we'll be more directly linked to them, and that will strengthen our presence here and help with some of the synergy in terms of that kind of capacity building. And really excited to work with the port in that partnership that they're developing. One of the enabling conditions, we like to say, particularly when it comes to any kind of aquaculture work, is access to seawater. And so the port is developing a new pump ashore seawater distribution system that'll feed into the new facility that we are looking forward to taking advantage of that access to that.
Well, is there a goal in terms of when?
They pursued funding for it last year through an opportunity that wasn't selected and was encouraged to reapply, so they're working on that right now. It's, you know, you may have noticed that they are already developing they're replacing the old cranes. So that project is funded and underway right now. The seawater system is in negotiations with the funder right now, and then the other one is being applied for. So next few years, things will be very active.
Yeah.
And I think
Yeah,
working on that too.
Right. I was wondering about what does it mean aquaculture?
So I like to kind of go back and forth between using the term mariculture to describe ocean aquaculture, and use the term, like for example, the urchin dulse co-culture. We think of it as more of an aquaculture endeavor because it's shore based.
Right.
It's still seawater. You can call it mariculture if you want to. I'm trying to avoid that term with a lot of negative connotations. But
Aquaculture.
yeah.
But
the kind of aquaculture we're talking about are things like the urchin dulse co-culture, the kelp mariculture, the Pycnopodia culturing you need to do if you want to raise them in captivity. So those are all, we're talking a lot right now about what we're referring to as restoration aquaculture. And the mariculture project does have a That pilot does incorporate some commercial components, but it's also related to our restoration work. What we hope to do is raise kelp that will produce spores that we can use for our restoration. And to develop products for food, for speed amendments, for soil amendments.
Cool. So I guess I just wanted to throw this up on the screen right now for people who might be online. I think we're gonna continue discussions, but if you are going to head out from online, I just wanted to put this up there so you have a chance to take note of this feedback link. You can either do the QR code or just enter tinyurl.com/orca survey. And some of the questions that are asked are things like, what do kelp forests mean to you? What is their importance? What changes have you seen over the last 10 years? I really want to hear you say, hey, I used to walk down the beach and see these giant mats of kelp, and now I walk down the beach and I see nothing. And so that kind of feedback, and then also just any feedback you have on what was presented on the stewardship plan today. And then the last question that I'm going to ask all of you guys in particular, and then I'll let you just mingle and eat pizza and hang out. But one more thing to pick everyone's brain about before we're done. If you haven't had a chance, I can put this back up at the end as well. And there are also QR codes and paper versions. If you want to fill out a paper version, I have paper versions and pens up here. But one question that I would really like to just ask everyone about, and then we'll wrap up, is this concept of what's the most important sort of considerations that you have for when we should be prioritizing our active protection and restoration sites. So what do you think is most important? What do you value either for your livelihood or personally when we're deciding where we should be doing our kelp restoration work? And this can take on many different forms. It can be proximity to a port. It can be areas that you see near your hometown, things that are areas where you've seen active loss, or areas that are impacted heaviest, areas that you think are logistically the easiest to reach, things like that. What is the value to you? And so areas where you think there would be the greatest economic benefit, things like that, just whatever you may think of when you think of, hey, we should be working in this area, what defines that? And so I just wanted to point out that this can mean a lot of different things for a lot of different people. And so we're gathering feedback from policymakers, from our STAC, our Science and Technical Advisory Committee, from fishermen, from community members, to really understand what people prioritize, where those differences are, and where that overlap is. And that information is all going to go into our stewardship plan on how we're deciding where we should be doing this work. And so we've said it before, but resources are a really big issue. And so funding is a really big issue. And so we may want to work all across the coast at the same time, but we don't necessarily have the ability to do that. And so there is a level of, we have to decide where this work may be most effective and where it's most meaningful for community members or for fishermen, and how we're making those determinations moving forward. And so, yeah, does anyone have any questions on that one?
I just have
a comment. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for doing that.
Erosion along the
Yes.
pathway.
Yeah.
And I particularly think kelp for me is like very important for coastal stabilization.
Yep.
Especially in rising sea temperatures. So I would say that's probably one of my priorities, and just focusing on where they're gonna have the highest impact for fin fishery recovery
Yep.
is also huge.
Yeah. Well, I was thinking when I saw the lack of the, around the redfish rocks,
Mhm.
you know, that.
The marine reserve
Yeah, since it's already reserved, it seems like that would be a,
priority.
yeah.
Okay. Marine reserves, I'm hearing coastal protection or areas of coastal erosion, fin fisheries. Yeah. Those all sound good. Yeah, I mean, I think marine reserves is an important one. So protecting those areas where we already know that they have some other protections, and making sure we can build those up so that the areas that already have those protections can have a more robust and biodiverse and rich region that can maybe help seed the surrounding areas.
It would be cool, obviously, just around the port area.
Yeah.
You know, where people go.
Yeah,
I think getting the word out, you talk to people.
getting the word out.
People don't know
Yeah.
that there's a disaster on our coast. They
Because
just-
people don't spend their every day in the
No,
water.
I mean,
Yeah,
the entire state of Oregon could benefit from knowing this stuff.
Yeah.
And maybe that would help the funding come through.
yeah. So community outreach and
Yeah.
engagement, that whole piece, yeah,
You know,
great.
Shoot little ads on the TV. Oh, yeah, that's right, their one prescription.
But you can put ads on like Instagram and Facebook and stuff too
Yeah.
now, so,
Yeah.
yeah. That's a great one, yeah.
Yeah, I just have a question about funding. What are your sources for funding job creation? What are the pools? Are the grants that really funded, really state?
So, it's all over the board, all over the map, right? So we've got the project we're talking about today is, it's NOAA funded, National Centers for Coastal Ocean Science, and that was a congressional appropriation that occurred 2 years ago. We received some Sea Grant research dollars for the co-culture work and philanthropic funding for the mariculture, the restorative mariculture. Also, a Pew grant when we started to pilot some of these experimental endeavors. So it's really come from a variety, you know, it's federal funding, state funding, philanthropic funding, research funding, and still pursuing other opportunities. There is there's a funding opportunity I'm looking at right now that's very much focused on workforce training, you know, workforce development. So that's like a sort of a different pool, but I think very relevant to that piece of the work. The good news is right now that there's a lot of attention. I think you're right to point out there's a need for more information because I think in large part because, you know, this is all sort of a crisis that emerged very rapidly.
Right.
Like we are, you know, some of the things we showed you, some of these images are things that, you know, this changed in less than the last 5 years now. So it's very new, and it's new in a place that people aren't used to seeing. And that's where some of the, like the photo spread in that magazine comes into play. It's like just letting people see what we're talking about. It makes a big difference.
The urgency is like, in the population, the standard of the permanent population on the coast is not that high. All you have those populations, the transient population, tourists, they don't realize what was there 2 years ago. All they see is what they see out there now. Getting that word out to everybody, there's a crisis going on. It's pretty serious, right?
Well, and you make a good point with populations. We also, one of the things that we have in our background and considering when we're doing this work and putting this plan out is the population distribution along the coast in Oregon is like inverse of where the kelp distribution historically was. So we're used to having kelp on the southern coast primarily and population on the northern coast. And so the people who actually would be exposed to that really aren't here, they're up north. And so getting the word out seems to be a really big one. And someone online said, asked about if we're not in Port Orford, but we are in Oregon, how can we help support this work? And I don't know, I think, yeah, Sarah seemed to have jumped in on that one. And so if you have, if you read through that response, thank you, Sarah, that's a great response. But looking at, she said, look at Reef Check, joining Reef Check as a volunteer diver. We'll also hopefully ramp up our volunteer urchin culling in the near future. And so we can get more volunteer divers out. And that happens not just in Port Orford, but also Brookings and further north, Cape Arago and other areas. And so we're hoping that that'll be something where we can involve people who might not necessarily live in Port Orford, but are still really involved in this work. Because this problem isn't just Port Orford. This problem is really coast-wide. And so we're fortunate enough that we can be based here and we are really central to a lot of what's gone on, both to be able to reach the southern areas of Oregon, but also to go more central and more northern. And so sounds like expanding that reach is a big one and really getting that word out. So working on how to do that in the future in a more effective way sounds like a great idea. Yeah.
Is the Kelp Forest Alliance a nonprofit?
Yes.
So people can make donations.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so monetary donations as well. I can, maybe post something, but we have a donation link. So we have a parent organization that kind of handles all of our fiscal needs. And so they're called the Ocean Foundation. They're based out of Washington, DC, and they are able to sort of organize all of our HR and our financial matters so that we don't have to deal with that. And they have a donation link on their website where you can submit online to that or send us a check and we can get it added to our funds through them. And so that's a huge way. I mean, people will send us like $10, $15, $20, and even that, I mean, it builds up our capacity. And there's most recently Winter Waters, which is a group that is more up north, has hosted a lot of events around food and dulse and urchins at different restaurants in mostly the Portland area, where they've donated proceeds to us. And so there are different events and things like that. And so moving forward, hopefully ramping up our scientific communications. Tom's in the works on that with the communications team to really advertise a lot of this better and get the word out and create educational materials that we can share with people and really educate on these issues and how you can get involved and how you can help. So we're getting started, we're ramping up, but I really appreciate you guys taking the time to be here. I know it was a lot of information and I'm happy to hear if anyone has more.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank
Thank you, guys.
So I have a question for the group before we break. The work really got triggered by a group of urchin divers we're going to Orford Reef and noticing these serious changes. And we noticed them around here, all of a sudden they're losing kelp. So our immediate reaction was, holy crap. What are we gonna do? We have to get working on this. We have to save these places. We have to get out to Millie's Cove and other places where we used to have thick kelp and we want it back. And then we've been proceeding through the process, and you probably picked up on the rhetoric that we've been talking about protecting and restoring. And I'm just always interested with a group like this, your take on when we're doing, as Elise said, as we are looking at this and we're engaged in a prioritization process, prioritizing places. What places are really important to people? Where do we focus our attention? Do we focus it in places where we want to bring something back that we've lost? Or do we take some of our energy and direct it at places where we still have some kelp so that we hang on to it? And that's a thought process I'm in all the time. I'm just curious, what do you guys think? Like, where's your head at? Like, do you focus on what you've got, keeping what you have, bringing back what you've lost, both? I don't know.
I really want to look to you guys to look at the science and what historically has been good environmental areas that are going to be successful.
Great.
I mean, that to me is the most important. What can we do right now where that you know that it's going to be successful? Because you guys have the knowledge. I mean, I remember things here and there and along the coast, but these things change. And so I really look to you guys as the experts to identify those things.
That's a great point. So
Thank you.
saying that means a lot on where we should be prioritizing, and as a community member, that's what you want us to be looking at. So Sarah Hamilton, who's online, has done a lot of really good work looking at historic kelp coverage in Oregon, and that's going to be a big factor in that status report coming out. And so you'll be able to read more about where it used to be historically in high abundance and where it is no longer there. And so that's a really big piece of it. Yeah, that's a great point.
And part of the process is going to be to look at that question, as Elise pointed out, not just where it was and where it isn't, or where it is now that wasn't, but where has it persisted? Like where, if we've got a 20-year data set and we can look at an area and say, well, you know what? This seems to be a place that does pretty well, even though the kelp is episodic, it's annual, it pops up here, it pops up there. But there are places where it seems to do well more often. So we may focus, some of our attention there.
And is anything done up there to kind of to preserve it?
Yeah, so there's a lot of research going on at that site. We've also done some experiments looking at the health of urchins in different places in that area. And now looking into the idea of, I'll call it conservation harvest, where we can dispatch commercial divers to harvest healthy urchins from an area that we have a healthy kelp that's adjacent to what looks like an urchin barrier. So could we do some preventive maintenance at that site and actually prevent it from encroaching into a healthy?
Yeah, I'm working with commercial urchin divers to really target kind of those borderline areas and potentially just keeping that, like holding the line kind of thing. So keeping areas that we know are okay for right now and keeping them okay. And so
then
just,
you get more data.
yeah,
To make a scientific.
yeah.
I think the least you mentioned, protect the best and
Mhm.
preserve the rest. And, or restore the rest.
Yeah.
And I think that's an approach.
Yeah.
That is very valuable. You don't wanna lose any more.
Right.
So you have to protect where it's already
Right.
thriving, and then go about restoring.
Bumper sticker.
I was gonna say,
Yeah.
it's really important, and I think it gets at the core of what we're doing, the protecting what we have and protect the rest, restore, yeah.
Yeah.
And restore what we've lost. That's kind of, I mean, it's twofold. And so we're kind of breaking up a lot of our different tools into what can be used for protection, what can be used for restoration, where are those differing, and what's the active work versus what's the more, we're kind of sitting back and doing this the whole time. And so looking at things like the monitoring, it's ongoing work, it's protective work where we can actually apply that coast-wide, where we need to have this understanding of where these things are, that protective work of the community outreach. And it's not an active restoration method, but we're working to really build up this base so that we can actively, protect these areas, as well as the in water where you need to protect this. We're gonna do some of these core strategies in that area to protect them where they haven't actually been fully decimated yet.
That's the urgency, so why urgency is so important, because y'all are doing your best, don't get me wrong, but y'all got a bad situation.
Yeah.
You don't even know what star wasting disease came from, you don't know where it's going, you don't know what it's doing right now.
Yeah.
But that's not y'all's fault, because it's just there, it's coming back, and you don't understand why the one species starfish come back, and the other one didn't come back. There's a whole lot of factors, you don't
Yeah.
know what's wasted because of whatever, I don't know how bad it is, but I know this bay right here.
Mm-hmm.
It was just about wiped out, and that's pretty sad.
Yeah.
And you got, it's like, you stop at, Ariel, they got more kelp left up there, but, it's because they're out in the ocean more, they're less protected, or more protected, or more turbulence, whatever, there's a lot of factors you got, that's why urgency to get people to
Yeah.
understand. You got a big problem going on.
Yeah.
It's really going fast, but you got also climate change, water temperature change, what's the one where you got the lack of oxygen and all the other stuff, the garbage, the food, all this stuff coming together, it's like nobody knows. It's happening right now, and it's happening really fast in the last few years.
Yeah.
Now, that's why urgency is important for people to understand there's a problem going on.
Yeah.
And it needs support, it needs money, and it needs to do something real quick, but that's, but now y'all doing a good job, don't get me wrong.
No, I agree.
All the time.
Definitely
Really bad.
keep spreading the word.
Yeah.
As Elise mentioned, we just hired a whole communications team, so you're gonna be doing a lot of
Work to do.
So that's-
And,
That's the biggest thing anybody in this group can do. Start spreading all this information on Facebook
Yeah.
pages, everything you.
Invite your friends to these in the future. Yeah.
absolutely.
Well, and you make a good point, is like, there's a lot of questions that we really don't know the answers to. Like, we can say, hey, this plays a role and that plays a role and this factor is really important, but there's still a lot of unknown in the system. And there are people who've been working on this for decades, like they've worked on these systems, and there's still questions that we don't have the answers to. But that doesn't mean we need to sit back and not do anything until we have those answers, because if we do that, there's gonna be nothing left. And so we're working to understand how we can move forward with this work in the system that we have, with the understandings that we have, in a best informed way, where we can actually make progress and help prevent further detriment and harm to these systems that so desperately need intervention. And so it is a really, I mean, it can be really discouraging when you list all those things out and you hear this problem and that problem, that problem. We don't know these answers, we don't know that, but this is our plan for moving forward in that environment, knowing what we do know in order to make a difference and start doing that work now, because we need to. So,
Yeah, the one way that I like to think about this is that we don't have the luxury of time to learn all there is to know before we act. And so we are taking a learn by doing approach. So we're not waiting to act on this problem. We're getting to work right now, but we're also studying as we do it. So we can refine and use an adaptive management approach. So if we find something that works really well, great, we're going to do more of that. If we try something, and I think Caroline gave the example of the green gravel idea, that might not work for us. That's okay. We have other options. But the key is to act now. I totally agree with you. I know for myself personally, I feel a strong sense of urgency. I worked, for those of you who don't know, I worked here as an urchin diver 10 years ago at Orford Reef when it was a thriving kelp forest. And to be perfectly honest with you, I took it for granted. It came back every year. It was always there until it wasn't. And so the call is out. And the other piece of the sort of how we approach this that I think is really interesting is there's some work that is showing us that protecting, establishing, maintaining oases of kelp forest is a really important part of the strategy. If you have a huge problem and you can't tackle it everywhere, but you can hang on to some patches, like keeping some places, working to spread them out or historically a small area, because that kelp is going to be producing the future kelp. If there's going to be kelp in the future, it's going to come from existing kelp. And what we know, when we learned from what happened in Northern California, where there was widespread loss, that it's very, very difficult to get it back because you've lost all that spore production. So we're really thinking about this as in these sort of targeted approaches, really focusing on places that we can bring back or protect and restore and maintain. And that all fits into this big picture about having a stewardship program that engages communities. I would love to see us, 5 years from now, be talking about the Port Orford Kelp Forest Stewardship Program and who's running that and who are the people that are involved in all these aspects, because that's our kelp forest. I want it back where we lost it. I want to keep what we have, and I want us to do it together. And if we did that, and we did that in communities like ours along the coast, I think we would get a lot of support from people in other parts of the state, country, the world. But it really is something that's going to happen here. It can't be done remotely. But remotely, you can help us with awareness, with send us money, send us the energetic people, send us students.
Yeah, I just want to take a second before everyone kind of disperses to just encourage you guys to please, and people who are still left online, please fill out this feedback form. It'll be open for a while, so you have time to go home and think about it and follow up and submit your responses. But I really do want to hear from each of you and hear what kelp forests mean to you, the importance of these ecosystems, what a restored kelp forest means, and then there's a question on there that also asks about those considerations for protection and restoration, what those priorities should be. So if you have more time to really stew on it for the next couple of days and submit a response, I'd really like to hear that feedback. And some of those, if they're really good anecdotal stories, we might actually include those specifically in the stewardship plan. I might follow up with you. I wouldn't put anything without asking, but if you are interested in any of that, that might be a part of our stewardship plan. And we really want the community's feedback, like Tom said. It's the community members, the commercial fishermen, the commercial urchin divers who really sounded the alarm bells on all of this and really said, hey, we have a problem and we need to do something about it. And so we want the community members to help us form that approach moving forward and what we're doing about this. And so I'd love to hear from you guys. Yeah, and there's also copies that are hard copies up here. If you don't have a computer or a phone and you prefer to write it down, feel free to take one of those. Cool. Well, thank you guys all for coming out. Thank you.